Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. This and next week we're moving to a new place, so there's going to be some disruption in video frequency and the upload schedule. I hope you can understand. I have very limited time also in the weeks, so let's just jump straight in and I'll try to cover as much as I can. So let's quickly go over the situation on the front lines so we understand what's happening. The most important thing to understand that right now front lines are basically semi-frozen. The sides are gathering forces for the push. Ukrainian side is consolidating forces and preparing to counter whatever Russians might throw at them. And Russians are right now using some of their mobilized troops to push in some attacks to keep Ukrainians essentially tired, while also in the background preparing their forces to strike. This, however, does not change the fact that around the area of Kharkiv, Luhansk Oblast, we see Ukrainians slowly but surely advancing from time to time. So here again, I think a little bit of a fix was done. So while Makivka and Novodina is stated here as taken, they're actually not. The fighting is happening outside the area, right? But it's movement that is happening around this area. So that's where the fighting is. And we need to understand why the fighting is happening, because some of the people misunderstand. Well, if there is a front line and there is another front line, how does we get fighting beyond the front line? And this comes to our misunderstanding of how, for example, the front line might look like. So I'll try to draw it as simple as possible, but basically, if we have like a unit of Ukrainian forces, and then a unit of like Ukrainian forces like this formation, and then for example we have like Russians that are having also kind of something similar. So for example, if a certain unit finds a gap inside of a front line and then for example attacks the unit that was inside of a territory of Ukrainians, then we get this weird situation that we're getting reports of fighting something that is supposedly within the territory of Ukraine, but it is kind of beyond the front lines. So the front line, especially in the newly captured areas where there is not a fully built defensive line, it's very often we will see these kind of, that's why it's called a gray zone essentially, where certain types of units can penetrate by finding a gap in the enemy defenses. And then can it not be exploited? That's a big question. But what we know for sure is that Russians cannot advance past some kind of initial defense lines that Ukrainians are having, right? So there might be passing something, but as soon as they reach some kind of a holdout point like Makivka, then there is a big battle, and we get reports of many Russians being dead. So all is good, all is fine, but there are multiple attacks, basically attacking in waves around this area, around Bilohorivka, and there is a big fighting around Kremina as well as happening. So that's what's happening on the north side. Russians are again attacking. Kind of the same situation is happening around Bakhmut, though because of the efforts of the Ukrainian forces, Russians like a little bit stopped on the eastern part. So this zone is not as active anymore. So right now, fighting is mostly happening around these two areas. So it's north of Bakhmut and south of Bakhmut. Again, trust in armed forces of Ukraine. Everything is good. In Avdiivka, we have the same situation as I described before. Russians are trying to attack, but now they've basically got a little bit of resistance around the proper defensive lines, and they are not advancing further. Though they did celebrate recently that they were able to capture Donetsk airport, which is, yeah, what is it, 8 months of the war, and Donetsk airport is literally right next to Donetsk. So it's quite hilarious. Marinka, people wrote to me that they were worried that the Russians were advancing in Marinka. Guys, it's fine. If you look, for example, how Marinka looked at the start of the conflict, and there was this a little bit of movement, this is all fine. Just look at historic maps, just turn the timetables for the map, and you will see that it's all fine. Where they are right now in Marinka, they are not advancing further. We get more and more news about what happened around Pavlovka, around Vuhledar, and yeah, the reports are pretty crazy. So apparently, this is where the Marines were advancing to Pavlovka, and the initial assessment were that yes, some units indeed made it to Pavlovka, but then their reinforcements came in, and we saw just how terrible it was. Like, I've posted some of the videos and in my community tab as well, explaining that this is why the mobilization will not help the Russian army. The Russian army is extremely dumb. If this was supposedly the most elite troops that were advancing, then the way that they were attacking was so crazy. Again, we're coming back to the fact that like some combat may happen beyond the front lines. So potentially, what we saw was when the Marine troops were already in Pavlovka, these kind of supporting troops decided to, okay, we're just gonna ride in column towards Pavlovka. But then there was actually Ukrainian forces somewhere in the area, and they just assaulted and got the artillery on top of the reinforcements that were sent by the Russians, and then they just got destroyed because Pavlovka is a very unfavorable position compared to Vuhledar. So it's crazy, and the casualties are crazy. But the point is, Russians do not adapt. They fight literally how it says in their training manuals. Ukrainians know these training manuals. And while they're adapting some places, like especially on like a local tactical level, like starting to dig better trenches, for example, overall they're still doing like these big strategic advancements. There are many reasons why, like for example, like some of it's quoting that generals just want to get promotion, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that they're literally just drawing like an arrow on the map and says go. That is, at that moment, it doesn't matter if it's going to be 1,000, 200,000 mobilized, and so on. Yes, if it's going to be like a million mobilized, okay, Ukrainians are going to start slowly, slowly, slowly falling back, but they will grind them down. And they do that. If you've seen the casualty numbers in the latest days, it's staying on a ridiculously high level. So Russians are getting screwed. And finally, Kherson Oblast. So we're getting reports around Snihurivka, we're getting reports around this area that Russians are falling back. We're also getting reports from this area. So the reports basically are stating that the Russians are falling back to essentially to the core defensive positions. I talked about it last time, and I'm going to post link video here. But it seems maybe that they want to have this kind of small, compact defensive, like a bridgehead in this area, rather than going out into the fields and then letting the Ukrainians spend the time in the fields while also being shelled by the Russian artillery from from the other southern part of Dnipro. The problem with that is, as you might recognize, first, Ukrainians have a lot of long range artillery, and some of it is even longer range than Russian artillery. So if the Russians will just set up permanent positions for the artillery, they will just gonna get shelled, right? So while it's not gonna be perfect and Ukrainians cannot like advance fast, it is still a possibility for them to just cover everything, cover the assault, cover the bridges, and so on. So there are some errors with that plan. And if you think that it's too stupid that no one would do that, remember, we're talking about the Russian command here. Stupid and Russian command have been proving to us more time than we had expected. Their decision making is on like kindergarten level and sometime lower. So I would not be surprised if that's exactly their plan. And maybe it's like this is how they want it. I don't know. But I think the most relevant part here is that we still haven't get confirmation about all of these circles that I draw, like especially about the activities. Yes, I'm getting reports, but especially Snihurivka, which is here, uh, that's been reported captured more times than I can remember. So I will need to reconfirm it 10 times before I can say that Snihurivka was indeed captured. That said, I hope this brings some kind of perspective on the update. And someone asked also, well, why does Russia like Kherson? Why are they doing this? And right now, especially, this is overlapping with the negotiations being proposed. Like all these. Oh, U.S. is actually pressuring Russia to Ukraine to negotiate with Russia, and then Russia is preparing this platform for negotiations that Kherson and so on. Guys, I already talked about this. Check out the video that I just linked. Thank you so much for watching. Slava Ukraini. See you next time.